Now, to start our work on this course project and to finally start writing some React code, we need a React project. And the easiest way of getting started with a React project is to use a tool called Create React App. You can simply Google for Create React App to find this GitHub repository with more information about it. You can also visit create-react-app.dev for the full documentation. Now, this is a tool which you can use to create React projects, which are basically pre-configured folders with some basic React code files and, most importantly, a bunch of configuration files which help you build that React app for production use, because it turns out that there will be a couple of transformation and optimization steps between developing a React app and running a React app in production, but more on that later. And in addition, this project, which is created with Create React App, will give you a nice development environment with a development web server, which allows you to preview the application locally on your machine, and it will allow you to preview this application in a way where the browser will automatically update the page whenever you make changes in your code and so on. That's why we use a tool like Create React App. It simply simplifies our development process. It adds a couple of key transformation steps which we need, and it will later also help us optimize our React code before we push it to a production server. Now, getting started with Create React App is simple. In the end, you find all important steps here. However, to execute these steps, you first of all need to visit nodejs.org. Node.js is a technology which is not directly related to React. It is in the end a runtime for JavaScript, which would allow you to run JavaScript code outside of the browser. And therefore, of course, it's not something we need at all for React, because React code is JavaScript code that runs in the browser. We will need Node.js, however, for this Create React App tool. To run this command here, we'll need Node.js installed on our system. Otherwise, this will fail. And behind the scenes, the project, which is generated by Create React App, will use Node.js for this development preview server and for these behind the scenes transformation and optimization steps, which we also need to build production ready applications. Therefore, you should visit nodejs.org and simply download that latest version here. Whichever version that is when you're visiting this page. The exact version doesn't matter. Simply download this version here, save it somewhere on your system, and walk through the installer this gives you. I'm on Mac OS here, but you'll get a similar installer on Windows, and you should simply walk through that installer, accept all these default settings here, and in the end simply finish this Node.js installation. Again, it works in the same way on Mac OS and Linux and Windows. Once you got Node.js installed, you are ready to execute these commands to create a new React application and therefore a new folder, to then navigate into that folder and to then run a special script which exists inside of that project folder to bring up a development server, this preview server I was talking about. But we are going to do that together. So simply copy this command and then open your default terminal or command prompt on Windows, and then, important, navigate inside of this terminal into a folder where you want to create your React project. You can navigate around with the cd command, which stands for change directory, and you then should ultimately go into a path where you do want to create this new project. For me, I'll just navigate into my desktop folder here, and then simply copy in this npx command. However, I'll change the name of the to-be-created project to React Complete Guide, since that is what this course is. Simply hit enter thereafter, and this will now create this new React project in the destination where you executed this command. It will create a folder with that name you picked here, in my case, React Complete Guide, and inside of that folder, it'll set up all the key files you need to write React code and build your React application. Now, as you can see, this might take a couple of minutes here to finish, and therefore I will be back once it is finished. If you are facing errors here, definitely also check the Q&A section, but most importantly, make sure that you don't have a proxy, firewall, or VPN client that might be blocking outgoing connections or might be interfering here. The same goes for antivirus software. Now, once this finished, you should see something like this, and you can now cd into this created folder simply by running cd and then the folder name, and then in there run npm start. And this will now start this development server, which hosts a preview of this React application, and it will automatically open up this application on localhost 3000. If it doesn't open this page automatically, you can manually visit localhost 3000 in your browser. Now there you should see something like this. The exact look and what you see in detail here might change over time, but you should see some starting page, some dummy React application which is set up for you. Now, of course, we're ready to edit this code. And for this, I already recommended Visual Studio Code as a code editor in the first course section. There, I also explain my Visual Studio Code setup and how you can make sure that it looks and works for you as it does for me. So on code.visualstudio.com, you can download and install that for all operating systems. But again, make sure you have a look at this first course section where I walk through that in detail. Therefore, once you did all of that, simply open Visual Studio Code and then open this created project folder with Visual Studio Code, simply with File, Open, and then pick that folder which was created, which holds your React project. And you should see something like this there. You might not see all these subfolders and files, as this can also change over time, but you should definitely see a source, a src folder, and a package.json file. The package.json file in the end holds all the dependencies of this project, for example React, but also a couple of development dependencies which are involved with these transformation and optimization steps I was talking about. The src folder holds the actual source code you will be working on. And you will see more files in there than I have it here because I already cleaned up that folder. And speaking of that, I wanted to show you how you can create new React projects, because ultimately that is what you need once you're done with that course. But to make sure that we're all starting on the same page and we're all working on the same kind of project setup, attached you find this cleaned up starting project which I created for you. Simply download it, unzip it, and then open that with Visual Studio Code. That's the project we should continue on, because here we'll all have the exact same starting state, and you will learn the latest version of React with that as well. So make sure you download, unzip, and open that attached starting project, which is this cleaned up project originally created with Create React App. Once you did that, make sure you cancel that running development server, which we started a couple of seconds ago, by going to the terminal where this server is running and hit Ctrl+C in there, which will cancel it. And now, by the way, if you reload localhost 3000, you'll no longer see the website therefore. But we'll restart it in a second, but now based on this adjusted starting project I provided to you. Now here's a nice trick which I recommend that you use. We again need to start this development server to have that automatically updated preview of the application we're building. Now the best way of starting that server again is to go into Visual Studio Code, into that project which you opened up, and then here in the menu go to Terminal, New Terminal. And open a new terminal here, which is now your default system terminal or command prompt, just integrated into Visual Studio Code. And in there, you need to run two commands. First of all, run npm install. This will look into the package.json file and download and install all the required packages and dependencies into this project folder. Simply enter this and hit enter. We didn't have to do this earlier because when we ran npx create react app, this was already included in the overall setup process. Now that I shared my starting project with you, you need to run this once to download and install all the dependencies. They are not part of the shared zip file, since that would unnecessarily bloat that zip file. Indeed, all course attachments which you find will be missing these locally downloaded and installed dependencies, since that would just increase the zip file size, and in the end you just need to run npm install in the downloaded and extracted zip files to recreate and re-download all the dependencies. You will now have a node modules folder here which holds all these dependencies. That's, by the way, a folder you should never edit or work in, because that's really just all these third-party packages downloaded onto your local system. Now once that's done, you can run npm start again, and this will again bring up this development server. You should also keep that development server running as long as you're working on the code, because if you shut it down, you can't preview your application anymore, though you can always restart it by running npm start again. And as long as this process is running here, it will automatically watch your code files, and whenever you change something in code, it will automatically update the loaded page in the browser. So keep this process up and running here. Don't close this terminal, don't quit it with Ctrl+C unless you're done for the day. Now on localhost 3000, you should see something like this. Simply some let's get started text, which isn't particularly easy to read, but that's really just a dummy starting state on which we're going to build up on. And that is the starting project we're now going to work with. That's now our starting state, where we can now finally dive into the React source code and start learning React.